I've no doubt that the Irish people are beginning to wake up to what's going on. People that we would call normies are even beginning to get very concerned about things. And I certainly find that in the meetings which I attend. This is the 100th anniversary, approximately, of the foundation of our state. And that's a very important celebration in our history. But we have to ask ourselves as Irish people why it is that 100 years after we established this state, and after all the prosperity and froth of the Celtic Tiger years, that there will be people in this country during this coming winter who will have to make a choice between eating and heating in order to stay alive. It is not okay that elderly people are forced to go out on public transport during the day because they cannot afford to keep warm. It is not okay that Irish people are not able to live in their own country and are forced abroad to seek a decent life at the same time as the government is actively pursuing an open door policy of importing very questionable refugees into our country without making suitable provision for their housing or their welfare. How is it a part of building back better that we face increased restrictions of movement, inflated oil prices, pressure on us to eat insects while we export our beef, reduced healthcare, and the fact that housing has now become unaffordable for our young people? We have to stand in solidarity with ordinary people, particularly older people who have given their lives to this country and now find that they are not able to live here and not able to access proper health care. The spectre of inflation, officially at 9%, but we all know from the prices we face that it is much higher, threatens to wipe out the savings and the welfare of all of us, while our elites hoover up our property, our businesses, our jobs and our living standards. The entire policy of the European Union for the past 30 years has been to keep inflation down. This policy has now been spectacularly reversed, and we need to ask why this has happened. I want to propose 3 reasons. The first and most obvious one is the disastrous policy pursued in the main by the Green Party to attack energy prices and to deliberately make energy unaffordable in an effort to reduce carbon emissions. The policies that we have adopted at aiming for an impossibly difficult target of reducing energy emissions by 50% in the space of 8 years will have the effect of devastating our economy, hugely inflating food prices, and inflating the cost of everything on which energy depends, which is practically everything. This policy is being pursued by people who demand that we accept their nonsense junk science about global warming as being fact, the high priests of the Green Party and Sinn Féin who trumpet every warm day as a social catastrophe. Well, you know what? I enjoy a few days of warm weather that we get every year. I enjoy my barbecues and my beer, and I'm not going to let that bunch of creeps take them from me, okay? And I'm not going to let them make me feel guilty about it. The entire purpose of the Green Agenda has been set up deliberately by an elite band of globalists who want to use a so-called emergency. Why is it always an emergency? A health emergency, or a climate emergency, or an oil emergency? As a justification for seizing property, for impoverishing the population, for destroying agriculture and food production, and, as socialism always does, for destroying and undermining the stability of society. These people have now become dangerous in that they represent a direct threat to the lives and welfare of every one of us. The deliberate destruction of the agricultural sector by unreasonable demands for the reduction in energy usage, the culling of cattle, the herd, and forcing us to change our diet to eating factory-produced food and insects will of course have a catastrophic effect on food prices, the primary index of inflation, as well as making the lives of ordinary people more difficult. Perhaps that's what they really want. I don't know, I sometimes wonder. The second reason for the cost of living crisis is the irresponsible decision of the Irish government to open the borders of this country to an unlimited number of Ukrainian refugees, a huge proportion of whom have no connection whatsoever with Ukraine. Without any limit, while the western part of Ukraine is perfectly safe and is filled with hotels looking for business. The Ukrainian war is essentially a border dispute in which Ireland should have no hand, act or part. It has been fomented by American and European interference in that country over the past 8 years, and it has been persistently warned about by Russia, which has repeatedly stated over the past 8 years that it would not tolerate NATO incursion up against our borders. The response of Europe has been a disastrous sanctions policy, which has done more harm to us than it will ever do to Russia. The third reason for inflation is the lack of a sound money policy within the European Union since 2008, when money was printed in order to cover the series of banking collapses which commenced in that year. This lack of sound money policy has been exacerbated by the utterly ruinous and counterproductive and in fact destructive policies enacted during the lockdowns. And I want to point out that our party, the Irish Freedom Party, was the first party to ask for an end for the lockdowns and the first one to warn 2 years ago that what they were doing would lead to massive inflation. And we're seeing that playing out as we speak at the moment. At 9% inflation, I don't think so. I don't think so. It's much higher. In respect to the vaccines, a recent United Kingdom study has found that all-cause mortality is lower in every age cohort among people who did not receive the vaccine than among those who did. We're going to need an accounting for this. We urgently need an accounting for this. And there's another anniversary coming up at the moment. I think today is the 75th anniversary of the first judgments in the Nuremberg trials. Well, you know, I think we're going to need a new Nuremberg trial, because I have no doubt that many of the people in the so-called medical profession who did what they did knew what they were doing and knew what the consequences would be. So whether the government were advised or not, it doesn't matter. You cannot abrogate the responsibilities of government to bureaucrats, and if you do so, you must take responsibility. We need these people to be held accountable, because if they're not, they'll do it again. We have to bring this madness to an end. You cannot close down an economy for 2 years and print funny money and expect that there will not be an inflationary result. The only policies which our government seem to adopt in its drive to tackle inflation is to print more money, to engage in a foolhardy effort to control prices and to attempt to buy off sectors of the economy. There are two indicators that you will get of an oncoming collapse of economy. The first is price and wage controls. And you know that's coming when they deny that it's going to happen. They're now denying that they're going to do this, but at the same time they're attempting to control energy prices and attempting to control petrol prices. That will not work to curb inflation. If you want to control inflation, I want to put forward 3 policies which may work. Number 1, an immediate end to all carbon taxes and an abandonment of the devastating policies of limiting carbon emissions. If that means withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords, then that's what we should immediately do. We in Ireland must begin to look to our own interests, and we must stop being party boys or poster boys for the European Union. Ireland is disproportionately affected by the crackpot ideology of global warming, and our government must begin to work on behalf of the Irish people and not on behalf of our reckless banking elite who wish to destroy private property, impoverish the entire world, and wreck the system of food production. Number 2, an immediate end to uncontrolled and unvetted and unconscionable immigration, which is driving the price of housing and accommodation beyond the reach of ordinary Irish people, and will devastate our social welfare system and can only lead to a massive increase in our national debt and to massive social disruption. There is a role for immigration in society, but it must be based on the needs of the welcoming society and not of the obsessive virtue signalling of the crazed bureaucrats of Brussels. Number 3, an immediate end to the European Union sanctions against Russia, and if necessary, a withdrawal of Ireland from participation in those sanctions. The only countries which are damaged by those sanctions are the countries of Europe. The Russian economy has been immeasurably strengthened by the increase in the price of oil which this has caused. Russia is the natural hinterland of Europe, and by engaging in this reckless policy of sanctions against it, we have driven our natural hinterland into the arms of China and India. We need Russia to a far greater extent than they need us, and it is becoming obvious that they have called our sanctions bluff, and we need to realize that. One thing about Putin, he doesn't bluff, and he knows when people are bluffing. You don't bluff against the Russian chess master, and if you want your bluff called, he'll do it for you. And we're going to find out the hard way what the consequences of that will be. The best decision that Britain ever made was pulling out of the European Union. Every policy that the European Union has adopted in past years relating to climate change, relating to the war against Russia, relating to the horrible agenda of transgender, and relating to an effective policy of mass migration are policies which are undermining the stability of Europe and will eventually lead to the social collapse unless we are stopped and stopped soon. You sometimes have to wonder if that kind of civil unrest and social collapse isn't precisely what our government parties are aiming for. We may not be able to affect change in the policies of Europe, but we must look to our own interests. And if that means negotiating withdrawal from the European Union, then now that those policies of that union are proving to be so damaging to our interests, then I say now is the time to effect that withdrawal. I want to congratulate Yellow Vests again for the re-emergence of their rallies. Yes, our numbers are small, but I have a funny feeling that as this winter proceeds, these rallies are going to become a lot bigger, because there's going to be a lot more people who finally realize what is going on, and they're going to see what's happening to them, and they're going to be on the streets, and we're going to be here to welcome them. We must also face the possibility that in the very near future, meetings such as this may no longer be possible, and that the people who address issues such as immigration and withdrawal from the European Union may find themselves criminalised. In the teeth of a rising crime rate, the main interest of our Minister for Justice is in figuring out ways of silencing the opposition by the proposed hate speech legislation, whose only purpose is the destruction of the right of free assembly and the destruction of the right of free speech, so that it will prevent us from being able to have meetings like this if we let them get away with it. I therefore want to announce that on the Saturday, the 10th of September, the Irish Freedom Party, which I chair, is going to organise a rally for protection of freedom of speech. That will be held outside All Air at 2:30, Saturday, the 10th of September, outside All Air in the Kildare Street entrance. Please come along to that. This is the most critical issue that we face, because if they destroy free speech, there is no way of protecting our other freedoms. Free speech is the primary right of every freeborn citizen. We cannot allow them to take that away. And if you read the hate speech legislation, it is aimed specifically at enabling people to shut opposition down and to shut what they call offensive speech down. Well, if you're not prepared to take offence, you shouldn't be in the public square. Yes. We must make it clear to the government and to the false opposition that we will hold them to account for the damage they have caused. Every day in the teeth of real emergencies which we face, we read of some new crackpot policy, some new failure which is presented as if it is somebody else's fault. If the government wants to declare war on the interests of the Irish people, then they should realise that the Irish people have not even begun to fight back yet. I suspect we may be in for a long winter of discontent, and I would urge all of you to rally around those who stand by freedom, who stand by justice, and who stand by the nation of Ireland. Thank you very much.